chance to talk with parents, I was an intern, beginning school psychologist, and I didn't have any kids. But yet there was one of my mentors, he taught me that there's a lot more wisdom in the room than you'll ever have or try to match. So what I wanted to do is maybe spend about a half hour going over some of the issues, and then, in exchanging the question and answer, because y'all came here for something specific or something more general, and you're trying to narrow down on something more specific, but I want to make sure we address your issues, definitely. I want to thank Principal Diggs for allowing me to use this great space, because as an educator, you're always wondering, what do parents think about what we're doing? And so it's good to be able to have this interaction. Ms. Adams and Ms. Dale, thank you so much for inviting me and interacting with me over the internet, and we made the connection. I also want to acknowledge the school psychologist who's here, Talitha Bell. She's also the president of the Greater Long Beach Association of School Psychologists. So she and I'm a part of that board, so she keeps us going. So I'm always impressed with the work that she does. Right. So emotional health. And I have a few topics I wanted to go over. Some of the context of today's situation, parents being able to respond, reevaluate, and remember, just 3 things there. Then other 3 main issues before we get into some of the signs of problems having to do with anxiety, bullying, depression, and even cyberbullying as well. And also want to end at least my portion of talking in regards to where do we go to get help. So moving on to today's situation. Is everyone familiar with Generation Y? Anyone not familiar with some of these concepts? I'll go ahead and go through this. Generation Y is this very interesting generation where they're more apt to get entertainment from the internet and or texting. Okay, this is a new phenomenon. Most of us have seen it. Took me a while to figure it out. I used to work over at Cabrillo High School, and some of my students had to teach me how to do it because they didn't, if I called their house, no one would answer the phone. But if I text someone at the house, they'll text back to me. Wow, this is, because I remember the old rotary phone. I don't know if y'all remember those. It would either be yellow or some type of bizarre color, at least in the 70s for me. All I remember is orange and yellows and strange browns that kind of went together, and it'd be just in the kitchen, usually. And usually my mom would holler at somebody to come get the phone. So that idea that we can just send messages back and forth, but that instant communication leads to a lot of different challenges, especially for teachers who work with this Y generation. And they ask a lot of why, and they, all the way through, but they usually don't take just because I said so for an answer. They're a little different. Generation X, and that's kind of my generation. Those of us who were around when the internet came out, Google creators, Yahoo creators, that's the Generation X. We work very hard, but we like to do one thing at a time. We can multitask, but we're not going to multitask to the level that our parents did. That's usually the boomer generation. That boomer generation, and I'll just use my mother for an example, and she'll be okay with me here, but she doesn't take a lot of mess. In regards to, she will protest just about anything. And that's pretty much what she saw. This is also a unique generation because this was a generation of the child. In regards to, you had Dr. Spock books and parenting books coming out, and baby formula even, right after World War II, and there was a complete shift, but things were centered around what happens for the kid, rather than, kid, you're 12, it's time for you to go to work. And that's my father's generation. He's from the silent generation. I'm not going to talk about a lot of personal problems. I'm not going to bring up all that stuff. Either you're going to do it or you aren't. All this talking, that's just too much because I have to go to work. I got to milk cows, I got to do a lot of other things. My dad, it wasn't until he retired that he stopped getting up literally when the sun came up. And ironically, he bought a house just after he retired, and it's buy some chickens. So he tried to get away from all that, but still, those chickens will crow early in the morning and get him up and get him going. But that generation worked very, very hard. That's World War II, lived through the Depression and other types of things, and so they have a unique view on the world. Sometimes you have all these generations within the same house. And that can pose for interesting interactions, but as well, interesting expectations about what happens at school, what happens when you encounter a problem. I think that's the main issue I want to focus in on. How do you encounter a problem? Okay, what do you do? Right, teenagers. They're a new human phenomenon. Most of us remember either Rebel Without a Cause and James Dean or Happy Days. But the reason why they were so significant is because the generation before that really didn't have teenagers to this level. Right over here in Lakewood, we have the first major mall and surrounding community to go with the mall. So the kids would actually think this is a pastime, going to the mall. And I know my dad had a hard time with this. So you have no money. So you're going to leave the house, and you and your friends are just going to walk around, and you have, again, no money. What are you going to do? It's great. It's air conditioned, have a good time. There's an arcade there. We're going to have a good time. Good time. And my father's just thinking about this, that he would have to go to school, come right home, work in a farm, missed his prom. I mean, he felt life was so bad, I'm just going to volunteer for Vietnam because it's got to be as challenging as the neighborhood I'm in currently or whatever I'm dealing with. Let me go ahead and join the Army. So he's looking at me in this Generation X, you're at the mall. That's strange. So this idea of teenagers is fairly new to how humans interact with it. So we've really been doing it here in America only for about 60 years. So in each generation, it's very, very different. Very different. Other issues with the divorce rate and new definitions of family. So with certain populations, the divorce rate was maybe 25%. Now, in the state of California, it's in between 50 to 70%, depending on the community. So you have new definitions of family, which people find ways to make those connections, which I think is a good thing, to continue to find and develop those definitions of family, but they're newer. And so how do we plan that out? And so you may have had generations of, this is how it has to be, but thanks to the boomer generation, we said, no, it doesn't always have to be that way. There's different ways of being, but you gotta have a clear definition of what that means. Okay. One generation away from poverty, and I think of my parents in that situation, that my father with his 10 brothers and sisters, they grew up in a one-bedroom house. Okay. If you're migrating or immigrating, you're usually doing it so your family can have a better life outcome. But that move or that change sometimes disrupts the connections you had as family. So some things you may take for granted as your child grows and develops, you may not have that immediate feedback from other family members. My parents both are college educated. None of their brothers and sisters had gone to college at the same time they did. And they got jobs very far away, at least in their mind. And I always thought, why are we driving from Oceanside to Pasadena every month? Well, all the family was clustered in Pasadena, and they wanted me to at least have connections with my family. But at the same time, LA is very, very different than Oceanside, San Diego area. So I thought it was just a strange and alien concept. I mean, I'm going to sleep and I wake up here, these different people, not having the same kind of connections. Expectations about schooling, expectations about how you solve problems. One of my favorite ones I love to debate with my dad, spanking, or discipline around the house. My dad felt, well, it was good for me, it should be good for you. And I didn't think so. Although my mom's only this tall, she kind of let me know that it's still gonna happen as far as we're concerned. I said, you know, there's gotta be a better way to do this. So I ended up going to college and studying an interesting subject like psychology. Both my parents were into math, because you can prove it and that's it. But all that psychology, it's kind of back and forth, and they say strange things like don't spank your kids. But there's a difference in generation there. So, but how am I going to discipline my kids? That's the main thing my father would always ask me. So although you've changed your mind, what are you going to do when they talk back to you? How do you plan that out?